Absolutely, no problem. Okay. I am going to go ahead and get started. I know we all want to get this done out of the way as quickly as possible. So I'm Erin with Super Restoration for those that I haven't met before. I am your regional account manager. We specialize in water, fire, mold, mitigation, remediation. We're also a full service construction company, so we can start your project from the day that you have a loss and bring it all the way to a full complete close. I'm first going to go around and introduce everybody else and then kind of address the elephant in the room before we get to the risk management for hurricane season portion of this. So I'd like to start out and introduce Steve Brayton from Rosenbaum Law.
Thanks, Erin. Appreciate it. My name is Steve Brayton. I'm the head of the association practice group here at Rosenbaum PLLC. We provide full service to our association clients, corporate amendments, collections, you name it, we do it. And looking forward to being part of the panel today.
Thank you, Steve. I'd like to introduce Matt next.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Name's Matt Reedy. I'm with Plastridge Insurance. If you're not familiar with Plastridge Insurance, we're the longest standing privately held agency in South Florida, going back to 1919 in Delray Beach. One of the association agents here, and today I think we represent around 1,100 condos, HOAs, and co-ops in South Florida.
Thank you, Matt. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Rafael.
Thank you, Erin. My name is Rafael Aquino. I'm with one of the co-founders of Affinity Management Services. We are a full association management company servicing from Palm Beach County down to Monroe County. We've been in business now about 13 years. We service just shy of about 7,500 units.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So first and foremost, I know that the hot topic today is how can we manage our risk as we start to reopen our properties, whether you're an HOA, whether you're a high-rise, commercial, low-rise condo association. There's a lot of safety precautions that we need to talk about before we are to reopen them. So I'm going to talk about the logistical aspect of it first. And we asked you guys to kind of give us a lot of questions that you'd like addressed. So before we get into it, there is a gray bar on the middle of your screen. And then there's one that says, a button that says more actions. It's 3 little bubbles. Next to that, there's a button that says show conversations. And I'm going to ask that everybody click that now. If you're on your mobile phone, it's a little bit harder to navigate, but you still have those buttons there as well. Anytime that you have a question during this presentation, please feel free to type it in there and we'll get to all of them as we go through. If we don't get to it as we go, we'll get to it at the end, I promise. So like I said, the first thing that we're going to talk about is risk management in opening up our associations and our buildings and our properties, dealing with the COVID virus. And the first thing that you're going to want to do before you're opening up any common element is to sit down and have a clear-cut plan with your team. That plan should look like, these are our hours of operation. This is our protocol for cleaning. This is what we need to do in order to be safe. If we're talking about pools specifically, we need to make sure that we're adhering to guidelines of the state and of the specific county that you are in. It's also important to talk about if that's a good scenario for you from a risk management standpoint. If you can't abide by the rules that the state and that your county has put in place, we should not be opening these common elements. We also have been getting a lot of questions of what should I be doing as in regards to cleaning my common elements prior to them opening. If you're doing it in-house, which we do not suggest, you're taking all the risk and the liability onto your association or your team should somebody get sick. So we do recommend that you use a third-party cleaning company to absorb the liability off of the association. And making sure that you're vetting that vendor is very, very important. The things that you need to look out from a vendor standpoint in the cleaning, are they using chemicals that have been approved by the EPA and CDC? First and foremost, does this company have experience in decontamination? You should not be using a bug or a pest control company to do a decontamination of your property for a virus. Those two things don't correlate together. You want to make sure you're using a company that has experience and that can provide you with references that they've done this in the past. It's very, very important that you use an experienced company and not somebody that just decided to do this because they can make money off of it during a pandemic. Something else that I got a lot of questions about prior to this was the cleaning supplies that are approved. There are quite a few products that have been approved by the CDC, and you need to refer to the CDC's website. It's constantly changing, and the last update was at the end of March that approved quite a few chemicals, but those are the only ones that specifically kill the coronavirus. So you need to be very specific with the products that you are using. And after this is over, we will be sending out the meeting notes and a list of CDC approved chemicals that they've provided on their website as well. So from here, I got a lot of questions that led into the property management and how as a management team we can do this effectively. So the first question I have for Rafael that came from one of our properties was, from a property management standpoint, what do you see the financial risks of opening the pool and other common elements?
Yeah, so thank you, Aaron. Yeah, the financial risk, I mean, obviously there's going to be firms, I'm sure there's already firms rallying up on how to bring potential complaints against associations or even organizations as a whole. But more than anything, I believe the financial risk isn't the main one. It's the human risk that we basically have to deal with, that what we're managing here. You know, communities as a whole are no different than, let's say, you know, urban environments where everyone is congregated within very small environments. So the opening of the pool, at the moment, we don't have a community that has opened one yet. However, there are a lot of suggestions more wanting to open the pools. However, we're trying to stay on the side of, you know, to err caution, be very careful in the process, just because of the guidelines. Like right now, Palm Beach is, as of the latest update that I'm aware of, Palm Beach is the only county that's permitting it. However, they're permitting it with certain restrictions, and one of those is being able to have someone, and they modified it to being able to have a board member or volunteer. But if police officers are having a challenge making sure people wear masks and they wear guns and have a badge, can you imagine having to have a volunteer or a board member or a manager or a janitorial individual really telling someone to make sure you're keeping that certain distance, to making sure that there's only X amount of individuals permitted within the pool? So it's going to be a challenge. However, it's how we handle that challenge and the decisions that we make as a board. While we can appreciate that people need to get out of their condos, I lived in a condo for 10 years and I can understand that. However, at the end of the day, as leaders of that organization, we have to keep in mind the well-being of the residents. And that's really what we're trying to protect, because if someone does obtain the coronavirus, we all have seen how quickly it can spread. So it's really trying to find that balance between the partners that you work with, your attorneys, you know, the managing company, your board, and really weighing what works best for you, because not all communities have team members available to take on those needs. And further, not all associations have the funds readily available to say, okay, I'm going to hire security just to open the pool. So these are really business decisions, I believe, that need to be made and communicated to the residents. I think, you know, communication is key to kind of to tone down the potential frustrations, just so that people know what you're doing and what steps you're taking.
And going back to the logistical side of this, I see a red flag from a logistical standpoint. Is it responsible as an association to place a staff member that's on your payroll? Maybe it's your maintenance guy, maybe it's your cleaning lady at the pool from 9 to 5. What other projects could be falling by the wayside?
No, that's an excellent point, Aaron, and I'm glad that you brought that up, because having to repurpose the staff to do just that, something else is going to fall apart. You know, most associations are running on their lean, you know, with regards to the staff that they have, for purposes that we all know. They're a nonprofit. So having to repurpose someone for that position, I think in the long haul, you're going to suffer somewhere else. You know, most associations are using the cleaning staff to try to help in those clean those high touch points. So now you're going to pull that person from technically doing that job to then just really monitoring the pool. Further, every association, as Steve mentioned earlier, and I'm sure he'll chime in here, is, you know, every association is different. You know, you'll have associations that have 500 units and less than 3 people use the pool. So these are things that you kind of need to know. You obviously have to be careful, because now people may use this pool. They've been stuck at home for about 6 to 8 weeks. But these are things you have to weigh. Again, I think it's best for us to just take the time and not rush into it, because you're going to need the supplies, like you mentioned earlier, Aaron. You're going to need the personnel. And also, if you are going to open it, the Florida Health is requiring a simple form to be filled out and about 9 points to be checked, and that to be turned in prior to opening the pool. So, it's not an easy decision, but it's not a tough decision. It's I think it's more of a business decision than anything else.
Thank you. Steve, I got a lot of questions. This particular one,
Yeah.
Does the association have to open their pool legally if the state allows it, the county allows it, or can they say, no, we're not doing this?
Right. So the associations are not obligated to open any of their recreational facilities simply because the state order or the county order now has relaxed the restrictions that were in place, because we need to keep in mind that the governor, as of the 9th, extended the state of emergency for another 60 days. So long as we're still under a state of emergency, community associations are still within their rights to exercise the emergency powers under 718, 720, and if you're a co-op, 719, which gives the associations the ability to limit access to these facilities or keep these facilities closed. So, Rafael made a number of great points about the financial ramifications, the logistical ramifications, and also, liability ramifications, because, for example, as he said, in Palm Beach County, the Board of County Commissioners clarified that, staff monitoring the pool facility to ensure compliance. Those are the words they use in the order: ensure compliance with CDC guidelines. So the burden is on the association to make sure that the residents are adhering to the social distancing requirements and all the other requirements in that order. I'm not sure I want to volunteer doing that for me, because there's a number of liability ramifications, and I'm sure Matt will discuss a lack of insurance if you do get sued. So I would be very concerned about using volunteers or even board members to monitor pool facilities. My community, we're a self-managed community. We've been forced to keep the pool closed because we don't have staff to monitor the pool. And bear in mind that we have yet to feel, and I'm stepping out of my legal role here a little bit, but we've yet to feel the financial consequences of this. And while we may have seen good collection rates in April, July is coming up. We don't know what to expect in terms of assessment payments, where we're going to be, and to commit financial resources to make the residents happy, because that's really what's happened here, is where boards are getting pressured by their residents. Hey, we want the facilities open, and it's not about keeping people happy, it's about keeping them safe. That's the overriding mission of the association: the health, safety, and welfare of the community. So I would hesitate to open the pool unless you're in a position to have the cleaning done, the restrooms, being cleaned on a regular basis, and you're logging these things. And then, by county, there's certain restrictions in terms of how many people can be at the pool at one time. So Broward will allow the pools open, but no furniture is allowed, and you have to be at 50% capacity of your bathing load. Palm Beach County will allow furniture, but that doesn't mean you have to put it out. So I've said to my association clients, look, if you're going to open the pool, then at least don't put the furniture out. Let the residents bring their own furniture, so that they're cleaning their own furniture, not we're responsible for it. Miami is still not allowing pools open. So each county has in different stages. As you go north, the rules are even further relaxed because there's low incidence of cases. So Martin County North, there aren't as many restrictions in place as we have in Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade.
What if a community doesn't follow the county requirements? Are there penalties? Are there fees? Is this monitored by anybody?
Well, I think for example, in Palm Beach, if somebody were to call the sheriff's office and say that they're not in compliance with the order, much as we saw the sheriff show up to shut the pools down when they were ordered down and people didn't shut them down right away, I think you would see a response in that regard if there wasn't anybody present. Perhaps the Department of Health would come and shut the pool down, because that's normally the entity that deals with the health safety aspect of pool operations, and they would close the pool. So I think either one of those either one of those enforcement agencies would step in.
Okay. Another question we just had from Dwayne. He said he'd like to hear more about the form, the Florida Health form for opening the pool. Where does that exist? Is that a property management level? Does the pool company have that?
No, the Florida Health Department provides it. I would be happy to send it to you, Aaron, so you can send it to him, or vice versa. If you give me his contact, I'll be glad to send that to him.
No problem. We'll get that to you, Dwayne, for sure. We had another question come in. How can we stop contractors from coming in? I have owners and guests not listening.
Well, that depends on the way the community is set up. If you have control over the gate or where they have to go before they come in, and in a high-rise setting, I would think you could prevent them from entering the property at the gate at the point of entry, or at the building level. And at this point, where associations, high-rise associations, mid-rise associations should be is, essential services, renovation projects. I know there was mention in one of these orders, and they start to get confusing. But I think that we're moving towards individual renovation projects starting again at some point. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that the associations have to allow that at this point if they don't feel comfortable with that. I think essential services, exterior services, extermination, building repairs, those are the kind of things we should be focusing on right now.
And if they have a resident that violates, what's the association's recourse?
Well, one recourse would be fining. If the situation is significant enough, the court system is moving slow, but if there's a true threat to property or person, you can seek an emergency injunction. That would be extraordinary relief. It would be tough to get, I think, but fining is certainly an option. If you don't have the ability to, escort those folks off the property, you may even want to call the police. The police are probably going to take the position it's a civil matter, and they're not going to get involved. So,
we had another question about the pool. If residents bring their own furniture to the pool area, does the association no association furniture is put out to the pool deck?
Well, I still think they've got to keep the deck clean on a regular basis. Certainly, we wouldn't have to clean somebody else's furniture. And also bear in mind that if the pool is open, the restrooms servicing or in proximity to the pool also have to be open. So those would have to be cleaned on a regular basis. And, one of the things we've talked about is, if you're limiting the number of residents that are using the pool at a given time, and I've had clients say, well, we're going to set up a reservation system, people call in advance, these kind of things. You may be unwittingly creating a record for a creative plaintiff's lawyer to figure out if a certain number of people got sick in a period of time, to actually establish causation, meaning that it happened at the pool area, as opposed to up until now, it would be anybody's guess where the person got it from. So, some of these procedures that could be put in place to facilitate the opening of the pool could actually come back to
doing that, and to document those things. You want to make sure you're documenting the cleaning of the handrails, anything that you're physically doing, the people on your property, it's important to keep track of. We got another question here. If a board member or volunteer is monitoring the pool, do they have to stay at the pool at all times, or can they come check periodically?
The way I read the Palm Beach County order and the Broward County order, I think they need somebody there at all times that the facility is open.
I would agree with Steve there as well. That's our interpretation of it as well.
Okay, great. Can the association have waivers signed by residents in case they get ill from the virus to avoid any liability?
We have prepared for clients that request assumptions of the risk forms and waiver of liability forms. And as I've explained to my clients, I'm not sure that they'll be enforceable in court because, under these circumstances, I'm not sure you can avoid your responsibility under an emergency order. It's somewhat of an unprecedented scenario. So it can't hurt to ask the person to sign the form. Whether or not it's going to accomplish the goal is another question.
Now, Broward County, we said was at 50% capacity load for pools. Is Palm Beach the same?
Palm Beach didn't put a specific number, but I think in most instances, associations in Palm Beach County have limited the use. They didn't give a percentage, and they also didn't address the furniture issue the way Broward expressly prohibited putting pool deck furniture out. So Broward was a little more comprehensive than Palm Beach in that regard.
Matt, I got this.
I would definitely recommend that they at least adhere to the 6 feet distance if they're going to leave the pool furniture out. Just make sure you're separating it, and just as a bit of a precaution, is maybe go a little bit further than the 6 feet. Because people are just going to slide their chairs. It's just what people do.
Right. Better safe than sorry.
Right, and to that point that Rafael makes, if whoever is monitoring the pool sees people not complying or refusing, then the association has an obligation to shut the pool down. They need to shut it down right away.
Absolutely. Matt, I've gotten this question a lot. Is there any sort of insurance liability if we open the pool and someone claims to get sick from the pool? Is that part of any sort of coverage that the association might have?
That's a great question, and that's been the constant question over the last almost 2 months now. Of if we open the pool back up now that the government's saying we're allowed to under certain conditions, from a legal standpoint we're now able to do it, but it hasn't changed our interpretations of where we are in the policies, and that most liability policies out there already have virus or communicable disease exclusions in them. Some do not have those specifically excluded, but it still may come down to a case-by-case basis depending on exactly what the allegation is when that lawsuit comes through. So a lot of you on here who know me know I sit on my own board for my own HOA, and my recommendation to our board is let's continue to make all of our decisions as if there is no insurance, because it's just so gray right now. Even at best, nobody's able to definitively say that yes, the coverage is there. We will be protected in the event of it. So being as conservative as you can and making your business decisions, and that was a great point earlier, making decisions from a business perspective rather than a personal perspective, where it's important to protect the association rather than open up the pool so everybody can be a little bit happier right now.
Absolutely. I got another one. We open up the tennis court singles only, residents only. An owner brought his tennis coach. Should a coach be allowed or restricted as a guest?
Well, so the issue you get into there is if you have in place during this emergency period a restriction on guests, that you're not allowing guests on the property, then you need to be consistent in how you apply that restriction. And if you're going to allow a tennis coach who's from outside the property, then now you're getting selective in how you're enforcing that temporary guest restriction. So my position would be, if you're not allowing guests on property, then that covers any guests, whether they're a tennis coach or a friend or whoever. So I think the most important thing is be consistent, so you don't open yourselves up to voiding your ability to limit guest access during this period right now.
Thank you. The other question we had regarding tennis courts was we have a manager who keeps getting more and more requests to open the tennis courts. Her concern is that it becomes a place for sunbathing. What's the best approach here?
Tennis court is becoming a place for sunbathing. That's not what the purpose is. That's not the purpose of the tennis court. So I think those folks have to be asked to leave. I mean, it's just not appropriate for, the emergency orders were clear, single play only, and reservations should have to be made in advance to use the tennis court, so you can be as fair as possible and limit the amount of play time, so people who want to play get an opportunity to play. So whether it's same with the pools, if you're going to have a 2-hour window or a 3-hour window, depending on the hours of operation, you need to limit the amount of time any one particular group is using the facility.
Absolutely. Another question we got, what does a guest constitute as? Is it different per type of condo? Does that get laid out in the the docks? Is an out-of-state relative considered a guest or?
Right. So, I mean, the general, every document can be a bit different in how it defines a guest, but generally speaking, a guest is considered to be somebody who does not live, who's not the owner of the unit or the immediate family members of the owner that live in the unit full time. So they're there at the invitation of the owner. As compared to a tenant who's renting the premises from the owner pursuant to a lease. So, a guest would also include family members who don't reside in the unit on a full-time basis.
What I would keep in mind, just to add there, because, there's been stories on it as well, is just, caregivers and people of that nature, because, we've seen the request, I need someone to take care of me and a nurse to come in and bring my medicine, whatever it may be. Under those circumstances, if there's something circumstantial that they're providing, that they're bringing that medicine in that case, I think you have to provide, an exception, just because last thing you want is a potential issue that someone had something happen to them because they weren't provided their medication or their therapy, whatever it was that person may have needed. So there has to be, again, some kind of a balance without being selective. If it's evident that person's bringing medicine in, the common sense thing would be is to let them in.
Right. I think that's a good point to make, is that every situation is situational and it should have time to be looked at. Don't just overlook something because you have this black and white rule. Does anybody else have any questions about reopening of common elements, risk management of opening the common elements? I think the important things here are to talk about having a plan in place, making sure that your plan includes your entire management team, your board, and if you need to consult legal counsel, that's what they're there for. Make it a conversation. One more question. What about a tennis pro being a coach and a monitor as the person who's supposed to be monitoring the tennis courts?
Right. So I don't think that's somebody who would fall into that category because they're not being paid by the association to perform that function. So, while in Palm Beach County they said volunteers and board members could do that, again, I would be concerned about delegating that duty to somebody that we really don't have any control over. So I don't like that option as an option. I think that could have some problems. But I've seen people do some things just for the sake of getting the facilities open. My recommendation would be against that approach.
This is actually a two-parter, Rafael and Steve. This is going to go to both of you. We have owners that want to come down for a week or two to visit. They own the condos, but they have been away for months in another state. Is that allowed? Is there a protocol that they need to follow?
Steve, you want to go on the legal side on that one first?
Yeah, so on the legal side of that one, if the person owns the unit, you cannot deny them access to the unit. If they're coming from a state such as the tri-state area where there's a high incidence of the virus and they come under the governor's order, to self-quarantine, then we would expect those owners to honor that order. And if they don't, you can call the Department of Health. But we would not be able to keep them from accessing the unit.
Yeah, correct. These are the tough things that board members and residents alike have to deal with. But this is the key opportunity to really start to communicate some of the concerns rather than just surprise someone with, no, we're not going to let you in, or better yet, you have to quarantine yourself. It's very challenging times for associations, but the key here is just communicating what you have in mind or what procedures with the discussions that you've had with management and your attorney that you're going to implement. Because at least if the residents are aware, then they're, when the time comes, they're not surprised with these things. Further, you're communicating with them with what you're learning and what you're educating yourself with in these kind of webinars that are being offered, across the board pretty much every other day the past couple of weeks. So it's important to really relay that information to your residents so they don't feel as if they're just stuck within their four walls and not knowing what's going to happen. I believe that where you're finding these kinds of situations is where either management or the board is not communicating with its residents with the plan of action that they're looking to take.
Thank you. We have another question about the tennis courts again. If you have a coach that's being paid by the association to maintain and also care for the courts, can they be the one to be monitoring?
Yeah, so based on those facts, I would be okay with that. If the person is actually being paid by the association to maintain the courts, then that could fall into their job duties, is to monitor the courts for social distancing requirements, making sure there's only single play. I would be more comfortable with that, knowing that the association is paying that person to perform the duties like that, as opposed to just some residence pro that came on property. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Does anyone else have any last questions before we move into hurricane risk management? Okay.
Aaron, there was one thing that I think came up about owners requesting credits for the amenities because they've been closed, and the short answer to that is no, they're not going to get a credit on their assessment payments because the associations were well within their rights under these circumstances to close facilities. They were ordered to close facilities at state and local levels, and certainly have the discretion under their emergency powers to keep certain or all of them closed. So they're not going to be getting a credit back for the lack of amenities.
Thank you, Steve.
Sure.
If nobody else has any other questions, then I will like to move forward into managing our risk during hurricane season. The number one question I got from all the managers that are attending this webinar is, when should I start preparing for hurricane season? My answer to that is yesterday. Hurricane season starts June 1. That means that we need to do our prep before June 1. What does our prep look like? Who do we include in our preparation? The first thing that we want to include in our preparation is making sure that everybody on our team knows the plan for when a hurricane's coming and what we need to do before hurricane season starts. So let's talk about the prep version. So what can I do before June 1 to get my property ready for hurricane season? The first thing you're going to want to do is take a look at all your big ticket items. When was the last time that they were maintained? When was the last time they were serviced? And making sure you have an accurate maintenance log of all of those things. If you have a cooling tower, if you have elevators, that we need to have a maintenance log of when those were serviced. And you want to make sure you have photo documentation that they were working properly. The second thing we want to do in our prep is making sure that our property, we've done our annual tree trimmings, making sure that we have supplies like boards, sandbags, anything for prepping our building before the hurricane comes. The last thing you want to do is not have sandbags or to have any sort of plywood to board up your building should something happen. We know those things become scarce. You also want to take a look at your strategic partners. What happens to your building if you have a flood after a hurricane or even during a hurricane? Do you have a plan for that? We need to talk about the vendors that you need to have contracts with for post-storm response. You need to have contracts for post-storm response. It's something that I'm going to drill home to you guys today. And that starts with your landscaper. Your landscaper is the first person that's going to help you clear all the debris so you can access your property post-storm. You need to have the conversation today, if you haven't already, and put something on paper and say, what order am I in? Am I number 1 on your list because I give you business 365 days of the year? Or am I number 150 because you're just the guy that does my tree once a year? So you need to have these tough conversations now. You want to start with your landscapers. You need an emergency service provider like a super restoration. You need a contract that says you are automatically going to come to my property if I need something post-storm. If you don't have these things in place, you just are going to be picking from a barrel of Joe Schmoes. Having a plan is key. I got a question on the last week's call. Do I need to have an extra committee for hurricane preparedness? Do I need a committee for insurance? I think it's a great idea to get your communities involved. And so it all doesn't fall on the board to do all this prep. It doesn't fall all on the management team. Get your community involved and get all these questions answered now before going into hurricane season. The FEMA actually has a storm cert program that has temporarily been suspended due to the COVID virus, but it's a great program to look into and to get your community helping you prepare for hurricane season. Matt, I got a ton of questions for you prior to going into this webinar regarding insurance. What coverages do associations need for storms?
Okay. Broad question. It could have an hour-long response, but I'll pick out three that I think are the most important to look at. Number one, obviously going to be, what is our hurricane deductible? What is our deductible in the event of, a wind event of damage in the building? So a couple questions you can ask your agent. Is it a hurricane deductible? Is it a named storm deductible? Is it a straight wind hail deductible, where any type of wind event, even if it's a thunderstorm rolling through that creates a microburst, causes wind, is that going to trigger our percentage deductible that can be pretty high, or is it going to be a flat deductible from there? So hurricane, named storm, wind hail. You want to see what percentage is that deductible. I have clients ranging from a 1% up to a 5%. It's very important to know and look at the values of your building and know what your share of that claim is going to be before the insurance company even kicks in. And then also, it's going to be important to look at the occurrences. Is this a per occurrence deductible, meaning that every single storm has its own 3% deductible based on the value of your building? Or is it a calendar year deductible, where if the first storm doesn't get us over that threshold of 3%, but the second one does, now the policy's kicking in from there? So it's really important to understand what your share of the claim is going to be before the policy comes into play, because you want to know how you're going to be able to fund that. You want to have some kind of plan as to where the funding is going to be before the policy kicks in. So I had an example I wanted to run through. If we have a $25 million tower and we have 100 units, one of the questions I get all the time from board members is, if we have a 3% deductible, is that based on the amount of damage done to the building, or is it based off of the building's replacement cost value? And the answer is the latter of those two. If we have a $25 million tower, there's a $750,000 deductible that we would have to pay out of pocket before the insurance company kicks in at all. If there's 100 units, that comes down to $7,500 per unit, as long as it's just evenly distributed. Some associations' documents dictate that a little bit differently. But it's important to remind unit owners that if we have to pay our deductible, your share of that is $7,500. You should have an idea of where that's going to come from. This is where I like to talk about the HO6 policy, the individual unit owners policy. I think it was in 2009 it became mandatory that everybody had to have it. And I think it was a fantastic idea, but the problem they created was it was just a logistical nightmare to track every unit owner in every condominium in the state to make sure that they had that policy. But the great thing that was a part of that is every policy, HO6 policy, a condominium unit owner will buy has a minimum of $2,000 of loss assessment coverage. So what that means is the association has a covered cause of loss from hurricane. They have to assess the unit owner $7,500. Your policy is automatically going to have $2,000 at a minimum to help you pay your assessment. So that's a provision. You can buy higher limits depending on the company. So it's a great opportunity right now to remind unit owners that you should have insurance, look into your loss assessment coverage, and see if you can buy more and what that would be. So I live in a townhome community, and it cost me, I think, $18 to buy an extra $1,000 of loss assessment. That was a no-brainer for me to look into. Two other coverages I wanted to hit on quickly were, after that percentage deductible for hurricane, is looking at the ordinance or law coverage. So ordinance or law, the part of it that everybody thinks about is, if we have a 1975 building, catching us up to today's building code can be catastrophically expensive. So ordinance or law coverage C in there is going to include our increased cost of construction to catch the building up to today's building codes if the county gets involved. The other part of it that I really like to highlight is the coverage A, where if half the building's damaged and like a tornado came through, half the building's damaged and completely gone, the other half is still standing like nothing ever took it. Without ordinance or law coverage, you wouldn't have coverage for the undamaged portion of that building. So coverage A rounds it out. Coverage B will cover our demolition costs and give us limits for demolition costs, and coverage C will give us additional limits for the increased cost of construction. The last one I wanted to hit on was the wind-driven rain. Wind-driven rain is generally a newer coverage. This is If there's damage to the building, interior water damage, but there's no exterior damage to the building, that's when wind-driven rain will come in, where there's no, you can't point to, okay, well, the roof came off and that's how the water got in, or a car was thrown through the roof by the wind and that's how the water got in. If there's just water intrusion without any physical damage, it's wind-driven rain. So most policies are going to sublimit that. It's just an important question to ask your agent. That's one of those ones we do want to see on every policy if we can get it there.
I think there's something super important that you said that I just want to emphasize for everybody on this call. This is a part of your hurricane preparedness, looking at your insurance policy, and it's a good time to talk to your individual unit owners and say, do you have a policy? A lot of the times that I see floods and losses non-hurricane related, we have unit owners that just don't have an insurance policy. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen during storm season, it's when. We're overdue, and if it's not storm season, it's Mrs. Smith who's here for a week out of the year and she has a flood because she hasn't maintained her unit like our year-round unit owners. So it's a good time to have these conversations. The other question I got a lot of for you, Matt, is what can our association do now to better prepare us for filing an insurance claim?
For filing an insurance claim, that's another really good question. Timestamp photos is something I'm always reminding my clients to make sure we have on file. Go out, take timestamp photos today, so we have documentation of what the buildings looked like prior to storm season. If you don't do it before June, you can always do it the week of. But if you got a storm coming at you that's a Category 5 and you got a lot to prepare for, taking timestamp photos that week may fall to the wayside if you're prioritizing what you have to get done on a limited time crunch. So doing it now would be fantastic, because I use my sarcastic response, my sarcastic example of the adjuster comes out and you have timestamp photos of, see here, Mr. Adjuster, as you can see on June 1st we had a roof and now we don't. There's no way that the company can try to slip out of it. They say, well, the building was in a similar condition beforehand. Having as much evidence on your side is really gonna help you in making sure that these companies don't try to slip out of a claim. And for the most part, I see companies do handle claims appropriately, but there's those smaller percentage of claims that are mishandled, and that's what gives the insurance industry a bad reputation. So having those timestamp photos, a line of credit.
Whether you're in an HOA or in a condo or in a commercial building, whether you're in a single family home, a townhome, or a condo, it doesn't matter. Making sure that that's part of your hurricane prep is super important. Go ahead.
Even for my own home, before hurricanes come in, every single time I'll turn on my my camera on my phone and I'll walk around the entire home taking video, documenting all the contents I have in my individual home, walking around the building, showing the condition of what it looks like. So I have everything ready to go and time-stamped. Another piece I talk about is the line of credit. Get a line of credit in place now if you don't already have that. And so when we have the claim come through or the storm come through, if you don't have your plan of how you're going to pay that deductible, you'll have the loss assessment from each unit owner, but that's a long process to get a special assessment passed. Having a line of credit allows you to go out and start getting your projects working, rather than being like everybody else who's in that line at the bank trying to get the money to start your projects. If you're the first one in line trying to get everything going because you can pay for it, it puts you at a tremendous advantage compared to associations that are more reactive, which leads into my final point that I'll make is it's incredibly important to have our vendor contracts in place. So know who your roofer is when the hurricane comes through. Know who your restoration contractor is. Those are the big two that I point to. Because the ugly reality is when the hurricane comes through, even when you do have that contract, these roofers and restoration contractors are going to be prioritizing their own clients as to who gets responded to first. So it's important to make sure that who you're working with does have the capacity to service you and come and help you after put your roof back on, put a tarp on, start drying out the building if you have interior water damage, and get everything going right away, making sure that they have that capacity. If you're waiting till after the storm to figure out who's going to do it, you're going to get those nightmare scenarios potentially where after Wilma, people were coming down from out of the state and they didn't know anything about Florida building code. So I have associations who did replace roofs in 2005, 2006, but it wasn't replaced up to code, or they didn't pull a permit, so it's affecting their insurance all these years later because they paid for a new roof, but the insurance company's not going to give them credit for a roof that wasn't certified at the time. So it just opens up a whole can of worms of how it can go wrong if you don't have a plan in place and are prepared for the reconstruction at that time.
Something you said that I really want to emphasize, I know that Rafael is also going to say something about this, making sure you're vetting your vendors correctly is a priority. And prior to hurricane season, you now have the time to do this, making sure that they're licensed, that they're insured, that they carry a liability insurance, that they carry error and omissions. There's multiple insurances that are out there for companies that are larger, that have more money and the capabilities to service your properties. Make sure you ask for letters of recommendation. Who else do they service in your area? You want to know these things of who you're working with. Where's their facility located? How long is it going to take for them to get to you in a post-storm situation? 2 days, 2 hours? So these are the questions we want to ask so we partner correctly with the right company for your specific property. Rafael, one last question for Matt, actually. Matt, do insurance companies write bulk policies for unit owners?
Bulk policies for unit owners isn't, I guess, a policy where several unit owners could get together and buy like a combined HO6. There's not a product on the market that I'm familiar with that. I guess the couple of underwriting challenges that I would think of is, you don't know what upgrades are in each of those units, so it's hard to rate all 3 different units together if they're managed by different people and in different conditions, and they're separate insureds as well, different liability risks. So it'd be pretty difficult to write something like that. Just not familiar with anything.
Awesome, thank you,
Interesting,
Matt.
Though.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got a couple of those questions again. Rafael, from a property management standpoint, what is the biggest risk to an association during hurricane season that you've come across?
Well, the biggest risk, before anything, what we're always trying to make sure is that we're protecting the lives of the residents within the community. That's always our number one priority. We have to take care of that because everything else is just really material. So in order for us to do that, it really depends where the building or the structure or the association is located. Obviously, there's different protocols that are taken for properties that are located near the water in comparison to properties that are just all the way west of Florida. Similar protocols, but they're slightly different when it comes to the protection of the building. Outside of that, once we protect the lives and the structure in itself, really what it boils down to is what the expectation is of the association and the financial condition. Matt brings up an excellent point with regards to knowing, your deductibles. And that's something that you should already know. If you don't know, you need to find out immediately because, you need to know what are you going to be liable for? What's going to be your responsibility should that hurricane hit? You have a fiduciary responsibility to mitigate any damage immediately, at least in the meantime, until your adjuster comes. So if you don't have the funds readily available to at least do that, you're going to be very stuck. Further, I always strongly recommend is obtaining a public adjuster for some kind of representation when it comes to these kinds of claims. We have associations that are just starting to receive insurance checks from 2 to 3 years ago that dealt with a public adjuster. So knowing what the expectations are going to be should a strong hurricane hit. But not being able to cover your deductibles and not being able to have the money to address those concerns is always a big thing. So we address that by doing, as you mentioned earlier, Aaron, having a line of credit readily available, at least working with your partner banks so that you know that you're pre-approved and should something occur, you can draw upon that line. You are going to have emergency powers, and I'll let Steve chat on those specifics. However, you just want to make sure that you have some cash readily available to address some of these major concerns. Also, the partnership. I know you guys have emphasized it a lot, but I want to make sure I re-emphasize it because there are going to be challenges. Even as Matt said, even with the partners that you already have, that you get along with, that you have coffees, they're going to reprioritize. They're going to determine who they're going to address first. But at least if you have the expectation, you know what the expectations are going to be now. It's going to make life a little bit easier so that you can communicate with your residents and let them know what they can expect from you and from the team that's addressing those concerns.
Thank you. I think that we all really want to drive home that going into preparation for hurricane season, you need strategic partnerships for your property and setting clear expectations. with your vendors, with your residents, and with your team, most importantly. What's our protocol for coming back to the property? What does that look like? I think that the other thing that Rafael said is reserve, reserve, reserve. Make sure you can cover your deductible is key. In a post-storm situation, cash is king, and you have to have funds to be able to start your project should you have an emergency situation. If you prepare for the worst case scenario, everything else is going to be so much easier. So what's the biggest risk for your property? And that's what we need to address first. Is it your roof popping off? Is it your windows that are 50 years old? So these are all conversations that are going to be different property to property, but let's talk about them now.
And if I can add one thing as well as one point that we've noticed when we take new associations that's missing in the plan, if they do have a plan, it's really taking care of your people, and your people are the team that you have that's going to address these concerns. You know, a lot of times you have these great lavish plans and they don't have the basics of ordering, you know, items for the team that's going to be addressing these concerns. You know, having even a tiny generator just to get the computer going in the office, having some food and water readily available for the janitor, for the maintenance, for your managers, for your assistant managers, and so forth. Sometimes that little thing gets missed, and these individuals, which are really addressing all the residents' concerns, are left, you know, with no water and no way to eat. It sounds dumb, but you'd be surprised how many times we see that piece missing within these hurricane plans. So make sure that you're taking care of your team that's addressing those concerns within the association.
From a management standpoint, Rafael, what do you provide your residents with? Do you provide them with evacuation routes prior to the storm? And then what kind of documentation or notifications do you provide to your residents when a storm is coming?
Sure. So I'm very fortunate that I have some very strong team members that are work within our organization, and what they're in the process of just finalizing to present it to our team, to our associations, are just the plans for this year, because we adjust them year to year. As things happen, we can improve upon those plans. But yes, there's a full outline plan that's going to show pre and during and post of what is going to be addressed for that association. Further, we're communicating that with our clients so that we know who's going to be involved within that process. You know, a lot of times, depending on the association size, you know, some associations, the smaller ones, will expect management to do 100% of it, and we can address it. But in certain cases with the larger associations, you know, we need the involvement of not just partners, but also volunteers within the board to address certain concerns. So, you know, my team has done an excellent job putting together these plans and really catering it to the association that we serve.
I think that you said something that I really have tried to encourage my clients this past year is getting a small committee together for risk management. If your building's on the beach, risk management doesn't just stay with hurricane season. We need to address a multitude of issues. So getting the community involved in the preparation for the community that they live in is highly, highly successful. So I definitely encourage you to do that as well.
And one thing as well is that you know, we've been beat up a couple times for starting a bit earlier. But we do it just because we're looking out, as I stated earlier, for the well-being of the residents. You know, we've been beat up, oh, you're closing the pool way too early. And then here comes the storm and we're ready to go. And we can focus on the little things that we weren't able to do, such as, you know, getting into residents' units that didn't give us a key, and having to do those little things that in the end will burn you because you didn't do them because you waited till the last minute. So just like we're dealing right now with pool closures and having to deal with that, it's much better to deal with a pool closure a couple days earlier, moving those items within, and addressing the outer boundaries of the association than waiting to the last minute and rushing to get these things done. Again, we're all about taking care of our people. And with that goes, we have to give the staff that's addressing that association's concerns, give them the opportunity so they can address their own concerns in their homes as well. And by doing that, they feel that things are getting done. They're being looked out for as well. And they're going to do a better job within the community that they serve.
Thank you, Rafael. Ready, Steve? I got lots of good questions for you.
Ready. All
right.
He's locked and loaded.
First one, this is the most common one we always get going into these. What are emergency powers during a hurricane and what can the board do with them?
Right. So, the same statutes that we're operating under right now are the statutes that were originally designed for what we're talking about as hurricane preparation and post, disaster emergency powers. So we're dealing with 718-1265 for condos and 720-316 for homeowners associations, and the statutes are not the same. And it goes to illustrate the points that you and Rafael have been making, Aaron, which is that the disaster plan, the response, and how to handle these things is project specific. If you're a high rise on the beach, your plan is going to be different than a single family home community because the assets that you have to protect are different. The proximity of living is different. Living in a high rise building versus a spread out homeowners association, single family homes is going to be different. So by way of example, when you look at 718-1265, the condominium associations have the power to determine that if the property can still be habitable, if the condominium property can still be habitable. And when we talk about the condominium property, we're talking about the whole property, not just the common elements. If an evacuation order has been issued, then the association can require the condominium property to be evacuated. And if people refuse to leave, then emergency management officials can be called to require them to leave. So just on the front end, those are some of the powers. And then Rafael mentioned, on the other side of it, when we're in the aftermath, dealing with mitigation, the board, the association boards have a duty to mitigate damage. That means coming in, getting your vendors who are on, hopefully under contract in advance to do the mitigation and take the photographs. You're not going to wait for, an adjuster to show up who could be weeks out and allow mold and mildew to grow because you're not taking action. The key, you have to act, decisively, quickly, as Matt said, date stamp all your photographs. Hopefully you've taken photographs before the storm, and then you can show the damage after the storm. And one of the things, when we talk about financial powers, one of the things that the statutes address is that notwithstanding any restrictions that may be in the governing documents about levying and special assessments, the emergency power statute gives the board the ability to levy special assessments without a membership vote. So that's important to keep in mind. And obviously the special assessment should be directly, connected with, your cleanup costs, your disaster related expenses. And hopefully if we've planned properly, we're not levying a special assessment to cover that hurricane deductible.
Steve, what if you are in an evacuation zone, let's say it's Singer Island or a barrier island, and somebody refuses to leave? What should the association do at that point?
Yeah, I think they need to call, like I said, emergency management officials, the police, and, it may ultimately be that the person can't be forced to leave at the end of the day, because we've all heard those stories on the news. People, refuse to evacuate the keys or wherever it was. And, at that point, it's on them. It's at their own risk. We've done everything we can. We certainly can't forcibly remove them from their unit. So, at least if we've reported it, we've attempted to do everything we can do as an association. And then at that point, it's on the owner if something happens. Should
they try to get him to sign a waiver? Not necessary?
I doubt. I don't think it's necessary, and I doubt the person would be amenable to do that. People who dig in like that are not going to be very cooperative in any fashion. So,
if I could add to that, what I would recommend in those kinds of circumstances, it sounds like maybe that person may have dealt with that in the past, is again, the communication is key. So if you're communicating already ahead of time of what's going to occur. So for instance, if you have buildings with an elevator, you should already have programmed that the elevator is going to be shut off on the 4th or 5th floor. What else is going to be shut off? What is going to be locked? So then that way you're in a way advising the residents that it's not an environment for you to stay here. And that's what's going to need to be done, because, if you leave your elevator operating and there's a storm surge, we've seen bills of over $300,000 just to repair the elevator. Forget the bill. Now think about not having an elevator for X amount of time. So, you need to communicate of what the steps and the protocols that you're going to take as an association, to kind of let them know ahead of time this is not going to be a comfortable environment for you to stay in. If they stay, as Steve said, there's not much we can do. We're not police. We're not going to go in there, yank them out.
Right. I think it's also important to add to what you're saying too, is that if they're on barrier islands, there's going to be no access for them to leave should
Correct.
something catastrophic like a Category 5 storm roll in and take out the building. They're stuck on that barrier island and there is no help that's coming.
Correct.
So I think that that's something that we also want to communicate to them. The other question I had for you, Steve, this is a really common one that I get in my world. If there's a roof failure and it causes damage to unit owner's property inside of their unit, who is responsible for paying the bill to fix it? Who's responsible for paying the bill to fix the drywall, and who's responsible for paying the bill of the contents that are inside the unit?
Right. So that's a great question. It comes up all the time. 718.111 addresses the responsibilities of the association and the owner and who's responsible for what. And when there's a casualty loss, the owner is going to be responsible for that's a covered loss under the policy. They're going to be responsible for the interior damage to the unit. Their personal property, furniture, fixtures, the unit owner is going to be responsible for. The association is going to be responsible for the common element unfinished drywall. The owner would have to paint, the walls after the drywall was repaired. And, the only exception to that is, when there's been negligence on somebody's part. But, in terms of sorting that out, that's going to get sorted out afterwards. After the repairs are done, you may have a right to seek reimbursement from another unit owner. But when you have a loss of the roof of the building, unless the owner could demonstrate that there was some negligent maintenance or some negligence on the part of the association, it's gonna get divvied up the way the statute describes. And that goes to what Matt was saying, and it's in these scenarios where owners are going to wish they had that HO6 policy, even though the statute doesn't mandate that. And I do recommend to our condo clients, when they are amending their documents, to add a mandatory insurance provision in the declaration, so that even though it's not in the statute, you can still require it in the governing documents of the community if the members will vote for it. So
I think that's a really great addition to your documents, and I encourage all of your buildings and properties to put that and amend and vote on it as soon as possible. It's not a matter of if something's going to happen, it's just a matter of when. And like I said before, it doesn't have to be storm season to have a loss in your building or on your property. If you are a year-round resident, we know in condo buildings that we're in a mostly seasonal climate. Does Mrs. Smith, that's only down here for 2 weeks out of the year, take care of her unit and service her unit as well as you do with your quarterly maintenance year round? Something else that you talked about regarding the roof and improving neglect. This is a really great time to have your internal teams get up on the roofs of your building and take photo documentation of what your roof looks like today. Some things that you're going to want to look out for. If you have individual AC units that are fastened onto your roof, are the hurricane straps still on them? Are there missing screws on the hurricane straps? These are all preventable things that we can do now prior to going into storm season, rather than finding AC units in our parking lot, smashed up cars from them. We can prevent these things. So if we can prevent it, let's add it to our checklist today. And I'll make sure I send you my hurricane checklist for condos and my hurricane checklist for HOAs after this meeting as well. So you guys all have that. You can add it to your hurricane binders. Steve, I think there was another question.
I actually had something I want to bring up with Matt. Is what I'm hearing now is that insurance carriers are being, I guess you could call it, proactive for themselves. They're going out and inspecting high-rise buildings prior to hurricane season and canceling coverage midterm if they determine that the roof is not in what they consider to be a well-maintained roof and there's a likelihood of failure in the event of a hurricane, and that they're leaving associations in a situation where they have no coverage now. And we're sitting here, it's May 12th, and we're going into hurricane season, and they've canceled the policy midterm. So I don't know if Matt's seen that yet. I've had 2 phone calls to that effect in the last week for high rises.
Yeah, fortunately, I haven't seen that on any of my own clients. Now, I also am not familiar with inspections going out due to hurricane season, but most property carriers will be sending, and liability carriers will do it as well, send out an inspector following the renewal to make sure that everything is in the condition that the agent told them it was.
Sure.
So if the agent told them, yeah, we've got a brand new roof on there, and they go out and they look and they find a permit that says it's last replaced in 1998, I absolutely would expect a cancellation in that instance. But I don't think I've seen anything yet where the inspector has flagged the condition of the roof. Aaron made a point a few minutes ago talking about the AC units. That's a big one that I've seen recently, where the inspector's looking at and it creates an interesting conflict because the inspector's looking at the AC units, and the association has a responsibility to insure them in the event of a major loss, a hurricane, but they're the maintenance responsibility of the unit owner. So the company has said the association needs to make sure we're putting these screws in and making sure the straps are there. And it creates a little interesting conflict because the association just creates more liability if they're the ones messing around with them and something goes wrong down the line. So, but that's an interesting one that I've seen recently. But to your point, if they're canceling the roofs, I'd be interested to know in those particular cases, how old did the associate or did the company actually believe that those roofs were?
Right.
That would be my first question. Because we are seeing companies getting a lot tighter on their restrictions as we're seeing rates go up and we're seeing underwriting guidelines get a little bit more narrow. Where, I won't say the company specifically, but one of them, 2005 had been the cutoff for how old a roof could be. And in the last couple of months, we've seen them get even tighter, saying anything 2008 or older, we either don't want or we're going to try to put actual cash value on the roofs rather than replacement cost.
Wow.
So it's we're seeing companies get a lot more restrictive on what it is. The age of a roof is going to be more of an issue going forward, and I am interested to see how much even more this progresses once we hit 6/1. Because that's when a lot of these insurance companies for property have their reinsurance agreements renewed, and that'll dictate how their rating goes going forward, because the industry has paid a lot on catastrophic losses, not just from hurricane, but from wildfire and tornadoes in the Midwest. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes in the next month.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing that I definitely want to talk about as far as roofs and what you can kind of do prior to going into hurricane season is if you have older windows in your building, after a heavy rain, we want to make sure you're paying attention to your common element windows for water intrusion. I know at Super Offer Restoration, as a part of our hurricane contingency program, we offer diagnostics and helping you detect if you have water intrusion issues around your windows. So that's something that internally as a team, you guys can look out for, and you can have your maintenance team support you in doing that. Do you have moisture meters on property? You all should have moisture meters on property. You can go to Home Depot and pick one up for less than $100. Check your drywall under the windows. Do we need to replace them? Is this something that we can do? We can budget in for a project for this summer. We want to talk about these things now. How old is my building and what is our risk and our biggest liability? Rafael, is there any other tips or tricks that you guys do from a property management standpoint?
Outside of just really, as you mentioned, Aaron, is really just taking a look at what the current conditions are. I mean, we know that the peak of our season is really September, October. So there is time. I'm not one to instill major fear. I like to take things in a very positive way, but don't wait, don't procrastinate. If you don't have a plan in place, it's all right. Just start working on the plan now, immediately. And then just take a look at the current conditions and the reality of what you're dealing with, because in most cases when there is change of boards and there's been lack of maintenance, sometimes those pictures are not going to look pretty, and you have to be prepared that if a storm hits, look, this is going to be in very bad shape. How are we going to deal with this when the hurricane hits and our deductible is X? So you can start looking at these things from a business perspective, because ultimately that's what you're managing on behalf of those residents. Any tips that any of the individuals that are on the webinar, we'd be glad to share. We do have a basic plan that we do share with anyone that would be interested in receiving it. Just feel free to email myself or Ashley, and we'll be glad to provide it.
And I'll provide Ashley's email and Rafael's email as well. Is there anything else that you want to add, Steve?
Well, I think you brought up a great point about the windows, depending on how old the age of the building is, because windows that were installed in a condominium building in the 70s or early 80s are not going to be like the windows of today that meet Florida building code standards. And I got a great education from an engineer on windows, where the windows in the building were from the mid to late 70s. And the window frame, when you talk about impact windows, the glass is designed to withstand the impact, but then you also have the frame of the window designed to deal with wind pressures. So while you think you have, say, for example, hurricane shutters over an old window, that doesn't mean that window can't get sucked out of the building, because it's not designed to handle the wind loads that hurricanes that we are experiencing today take place. I think we've had at least one Category 5 hurricane in the last, when you look at the statistics, in every hurricane season there's been at least one Category 5 hurricane. So the storms are getting stronger, and I know from an insurance standpoint, if you do replace the windows in the building with new, whether it's non-impact or impact, you're going to get a better rate because of the way the windows are designed. So that's definitely something from a risk management standpoint that condo buildings should look at.
And I also want to make the point too that just because you're installing impact windows into your home, whether it's a condo building, an HOA, townhouse, hurricane impact windows are only rated for a certain length of time for water intrusion. They average at 45 minutes to 90 minutes for 120 mile an hour storm-driven rain. So there is something to be said. You also need to do your due diligence from an interior perspective and lay down towels. There's water absorbent mats that you can put in front of your sliding glass doors. So there's additional precautions other than just having impact windows as well. We just got a good question. Can the association charge owners who leave for the season and don't shut their shutters or remove stuff from their balcony? Last year, this specific building spent 2 days just on that.
Yeah, I think that would have to be document specific. The condominium documents would have to be looked at to see if they have the authority to do that. And also it would need to be in the rules and regulations in advance of hurricane season if they have the authority to do that, and not just after the fact, charge somebody because they didn't remove their personal property from their balcony. That's something that I think requires proactive measures to be put in place now, if that's something that there's been a history of. So.
Correct, and you would definitely want, if it's being done by employees, you would want to reach out to Steve or your attorney and have some kind of waiver, letting them know, listen, we're going to do this for you, but if something were to occur within the unit, it's not our responsibility. We're just here to assist, in bringing those items in.
Yeah. Another point, if you don't have this on your hurricane preparedness plan, making sure that you have all the keys to all the doors in your building or on your property is crucial. It's something that we don't think about until there's an emergency situation like a hurricane or like pulling that personal belongings off of a balcony. But if we have to enter a property, we're going to take the lock off. It's an emergency situation, and we do have the right to enter any condo unit for an emergency situation per Florida state statute. So I think that just preparing your staff and preparing your team and having a lockbox in the manager's office is a great part of your plan. Is there anything else that you want to add, Matt?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit in about an hour and 20 minutes.
I know, sorry, I'm a little over today, guys. Does anybody else on the call have any other questions before we wrap it up? Thank you for asking all the questions that you did. And if you have any other questions that you want to ask us, we are going to be all reaching out to you after this. I will send out an email with meeting notes for this, along with the video of the recording. And if you guys need anything, we're here to help support you in your hurricane preparation in any portion of it, whether it's insurance, legal, property management, restoration, getting your vendor contractors in place. Please feel free to call us directly at any time. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care, guys.